Does your site kind of take on a personality of its own besides yours?
Well, Slave Girl on Restaurant Slave clearly did, I think, because there was so much of me that wasn't there. Um, some of my friends now who know who I am say, oh, okay, yeah, that sounds like you. And I think, how does that sound like me? I mean, I wasn't trying to not write like me, but I wasn't giving as much as I usually did at all as far as what was going on in my life. So to me, it sounded very different because it sounded very narrow. My other site, which is Lunesse.com, I don't particularly craft a persona for it, nor do I not craft one. It's far more accurate than Restaurant Slave, but it's still just a webpage.
How did you decide how much you wanted to involve in the blog? Since obviously it's restaurant related, but there are things that come in there that are non-restaurant related. Was kind of what made you decide this goes on the journal or into the blog?
It was a hard decision sometimes. Some of it was easy. As far as my journal goes, for a year there are tons of days where I'm saying, oh, I need to stay into the city late tonight. Oh, I was doing a lot of stuff yesterday. I was really busy, and I couldn't say why because I was keeping the two separate. It was difficult sometimes to figure out what to put where. I have a few friends who, on their own, had suspicions on who I was. There are online journalers who, knowing it was a woman, knowing she was in the Bay Area, and having found both separately and reading both my site and the Restaurant Slave site, a few of them had a few suspicions. The big giveaway for people who were paying attention was that both I and Slave Girl, my moniker on Restaurant Slave, both of them went to Mexico in early spring. And I mentioned it on both sites because that was a hard one. I had experiences in Mexico that I wanted to share, and some of them were very related to the restaurant site. Some of them were very related to my personal journal. And I forget which one I delayed. I think my main site I delayed by a few weeks or a month and had her go at a different time. And so it was an example where it was very hard to figure out what to put where. But usually, the restaurant stuff was easy to section off and cut. And if I thought that something from my real life was affecting it, I would mention it in a vague fashion. A good example of that would be when my husband was laid off, and early on I found that I had to pay for my own insurance at the restaurant, and we didn't have the money for me to immediately shell that out. So there was about a month where I couldn't be at the restaurant, and I had to explain why. And that was a large enough thing to explain that I was leaving and that I was coming back, and here were the reasons why. But again, it was very vague, just that my husband was laid off, we were working on it. There weren't many more specifics. It was hard to keep track, and that's why I tried so hard to keep them so separate and not mention two things in the same place, since I was trying to, for the time that I was working in the restaurant, I wanted to remain anonymous. I didn't want to be found out. I wasn't super anal about it. If someone, even says on the site, if you find out who I am, yay for you. This isn't like a big deal. Kindly don't spread it. I think there's a lot of stuff on that I keep out of my online journals. I think almost everyone who has an online journal does. And the people who don't, the people who are willing to put it all out there, I have great admiration for that, and I read those a lot. They sometimes end up being what's known as train wreck journals because they're full of they just let it all hang out. You see all of the underbelly, the bad sides of experiences or people or, the drama in their lives. But there are times, I know I don't, there are things about me that definitely don't come across. And sometimes it's not even intentional. But I've had people write me and say, you're so self-centered. And no, I'm not, but I'm keeping a journal. Journals tend to be about the person writing them, so I come across that way. And one woman said, why don't you ever do anything for anyone else? And at the time I was doing volunteer, belly dancing with a troupe I'm in. We would volunteer at community centers and old folks' homes and dance for them. And I just hadn't mentioned that. But that didn't mean that wasn't a part of who I was. But it definitely was missing.